summer can be quite cool, like when you're diving into a
river behind the BHI.
We'll play games with a best friend.
And Avery.
We wish summer would never end. Summer family trips are always fun. I hope this year we go on another one.
Not you, Corona.
With so many places that we can see, like Acadia,
The Forest Ribbon Trail.
the stars.
Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Doof Network, where we reflect on Wabbo's most recreational work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are back for more summer break. But before we get into it, another little teaser for All Packed Up to All Paled Up Beyond the Pale. I feel like the thing I want to tease to start with, Elliot, is some of the stream setup stuff that we've got coming up. I'm so excited for.
Yeah.
I know that's not what you have in the notes, but it is what I've been really excited about over the past week.
We've been sort of actually putting the pieces together now, and it's going to be really cool. I can't wait for everyone to see it. But for an actual segment that we do want to talk about this week, we wanted to bring up something that some of you may be sort of familiar with. We're going to be doing Maricica's Madness in All Packed Up 2, which in All Packed Up 1 was called Maggie's Madness, and in Parahumans World they call it March's Madness. It's a, I don't know, popularity contest for the characters?
Yeah, pretty much just a character popularity contest. But it is always fun to vote on who your favorite character is and get, indignantly outraged that other people don't like your favorite character as much as you do.
Yeah, and doing it live, like we do in these streams, is very fun because you end up with like less than a minute for each one, so it's this scrambled thing where everyone in the chat and in voice just kind of hurriedly makes their rushed arguments as to why their character's better. It's very fun.
Yeah, it is very fun. Do you have Snowdrop tip to win? Is Snowdrop the favorite?
I'm almost like thinking of not including her in the bracket just because I assume like she'd have 2-1 odds to win it, surely.
Yeah, I think she's in with a decent shot, but I do think people would vote for. There'd be some strong vote. I don't think it would be as one-sided as some other of these types of contests have been.
That's true. If you look at how the one in All Packed Up 1 went, the person who ended up winning that wasn't actually who I expected. So that's true.
I've forgotten who won now.
Well, we can't talk about it here, but I'll touch about it afterwards. Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah. Hey, if people want to, why not revisit that segment? It's up on YouTube, right, Elliot? So
Yep. The whole stream is actually available on YouTube. I've gone back and watched bits and pieces of it at some point. There's some good stuff in there.
Cool. But let's dive into the chapters for this week. We have Summer Break 13.6 and 13.7, but of course, Summer Break 13.6. Actually, they're both from Avery's perspective.
Yep.
But 13.6, we've got 4 days left in our countdown. Avery is doing rounds, visiting each of the shrines. First stop, visiting Dish. I'm
really enjoying the hype that this countdown
I know, God. I was so happy seeing the countdown continuing. I really love that the countdown is real, basically.
Yeah. Because you've definitely there's definitely been a pace shift in the story. Now we're getting a lot of, and this happened, or we will do this. Between the two chapters here today, they save the rest of the shrines, and it sort of gets a throwaway mention in the next chapter. But I love what it's doing for just, I've figured it out that we hit 0 on chapter 11, and I'm just there could be interlude weirdness or something breaking that up, but just the idea that this arc is going to sort of end on us hitting the day, and then we'll just have this fucking epic final day, final arc or whatever. The hype
definitely
is real. This is such a great mechanic for just
it is
getting us excited.
I do quite love it. It's very hype.
But to go back to this early part, obviously, you mentioned Avery stops by Dish's place, and I just it was such a joy sort of jumping back into Avery's head after last week was such a Verona and Lucy focused week. That we just come back to Avery and she just immediately can't really talk to Dish. She's such a people person. We've talked about this before. the way she does conversations is with the other person, like making eye contact with them. Like remember we saw this in Monty's interlude as well. Like she doesn't do well when the other person in the conversation isn't participating in a regular sort of way, I guess. And just the way Dish gives her nothing, like Avery's so clearly sort of scrambling and drowning as she tries to uphold this conversation on her own end. It's
Yeah,
hilarious.
I don't know. I think Dish was doing pretty well conversationally for a spirit. Like
Yeah.
there seemed to be a lot of kind of semi awkward formalities, which I found was just quite fun. Avery's always someone who I think does kind of awkwardly in situations like this, and it made it especially delightful to read.
Oh, yeah, no, exactly. But Avery relies a lot on like other people, their expressions, eye contact, like what they're saying, and Dish doesn't communicate in that way, and so it just means that like Avery just kind of struggles. Like I'm not really criticizing Dish because she's a spirit, like she's doing what she can. It's just funny
Mm,
how Avery's clearly not somebody who can work on that level easily, or compared to like Verona probably would have been fine with this.
mm.
Like the moment where Dish is like, "Oh yeah, here, come have a drink from my bowl," and she does this by sort of pushing Avery's head at the water, and it's like really, really terrifying for a moment in Avery's head because she's worried she's angry at her. Whereas, like, I can imagine Verona would have just like rolled with it for moment one.
Yeah, definitely. You can imagine Verona doing a lot better in this circumstance, but that's why it's fun that we get Avery driving it
Yeah.
because she's just so delightfully awkward.
One, as you said, like Dish as well, she's quite like proper. Like, there's the bit where Avery like shoots her a big smile to let her know it's okay that
Mm.
she can see her eating, which of course is like the opposite of what Dish wants. But you think about somebody who grows up in a big family like Avery, that's like that sort of posh dining etiquette probably doesn't survive their dinner table.
Yeah.
So it's just like something she's not familiar with, and she's trying to help, and she does the wrong thing.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so yeah, Avery moves on from chatting to Dish and goes and speaks to the next spirit, who is Lot, who is kind of a scary wraith spirit blend, I guess, who, yeah, assaulted two of his good friends, and their life just went downhill from that, I guess.
Yeah, it's like it really his backstory really invokes this fun thing that like Pale's been exploring the whole story, which is that idea of like how do you choose where to draw that line of where you recruit people, right? Because
Yeah.
like Lot is clearly powerful and useful, but
Yes.
he's also a dickhead and kind of definitionally not a team player. So like
Yeah. Lot very clearly is a an example of that thing that we were considering when we recruited these spirits of just like the Kenneteers have really let their standards slip a lot in who they're willing to work with, right? Like Lot definitely wouldn't have made the cut, except times are pretty desperate.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like, he is in a small way. You could argue he is in a small way the same sort of concession they made with like something like the Hungry Choir, right?
Mm,
Like this has been a consistent thing for Kennet is that they've had to figure out where to draw that line, and it's not an easy line to draw. I think like the Pig Dog Man from Arc 5 is about the one time where everyone was like, not that one.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I loved sort of being introduced to Lot and just like immediately sort of stepping back and thinking something I don't think I've really thought about since the new Kennet others were introduced in Arc 8 of like, do we want this Wraith in town? Like, because he seriously hurt his friends. Like, yes, he's useful, but he's gathering like a rat corpse army and kind of ruining the environment he's in. I think by
Mm.
the end of this chapter, my answer is yes, you want him around. He was actually pretty great, but
I mean, yeah, he was quite useful for sure. But yeah, definitely questionable morality working with a lot.
I did like that. Like Avery kind of brings up, oh, maybe we can like shape him into something better, and then it also just raises that whole ethical thing that we
Yes.
first saw with Matt and Edith of like, to what extent is it okay for you to shape a wraith or an echo or a spirit in that
Mm.
way? Um,
Adjust somebody sentient. Yeah.
well, I mean, because you could argue that's what parents do with kids, like to a certain degree, somebody is always driving that ship to some
Mm.
extent
Mm.
with raising someone. So like wraiths, echoes, and spirits, particularly smaller ones, you could argue are more akin to children, and it's okay for Kennet to raise them, in their culture, right? Like I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've I think raised this question in a number of different ways over the course of the story and in discussions around the story and our discussion
Yeah.
questions and stuff. I think it's a question that is intentionally coming up a number of times in this story.
Yeah, that's almost going to be a theme of today's episode. I feel like both of these
Mm,
chapters bring up a lot of ideas that have been popping in and out of the story, and there's almost kind of a bunch of things that are really coming back to the fore that we might not have been thinking about recently.
mm.
Um, and it's really fun because yeah, a lot of these questions that have like the story's been asking for a while, but as we get to the climax, I'm sort of sitting here like, is there ever going to be an answer to this question?
Mm. I mean, it feels like the kind of question that can't have an answer, right?
Yeah, no, it's always going to be subjective to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Like circumstances will change and warrant shifting that line.
Mm. Yeah.
I do love that. Avery puts on her wolf mask to meet Lot. Like just in terms of like setting the tone for how we're going to deal with Lot, she sort of immediately enters combative mode, not like physical combative mode, but like I don't know, I don't know what to call it, like personality combat mode. And this just like sort of made me realize, like, as she's going to keep using the wolf mask this chapter, she's the only one still using her like alt mask, isn't she?
Yeah, I think so. Um,
Like, because Lucy, I don't remember seeing Lucy's goat one come back.
yeah, me neither.
Um, Verona has just sort of not been using a mask because her cat one is still broken because
Mm,
she's not yet worthy,
mm.
and I don't think she's put her snake one back on. Yeah, it just seems interesting that Avery's really the one who found, I guess, some strength in being the opposite of who she naturally is.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting thought. I wonder. I wonder what to make of it. You're right. Avery continuing to lean into the wolf stuff a bit. Yeah. I mean, I think it's got some positive lessons in it for her, but it just it just is a little bit stressful, I guess. About 5%
Yeah.
stressful.
Oh, I mean, in both of these chapters, we're going to be talking about. Yeah, she's essentially trying to find this balance of the deer side of her and the wolf side of her, very explicitly in this chapter.
Mm,
Like we'll talk about it a lot when we get to the talk of the Garricks in the flashback. But I guess it just is interesting that like Lucy and Verona, I guess, lent into these differences, but it wasn't necessarily a personality change. It was like a tactical one. Whereas Avery was the one who almost, I can't think of a better way to phrase this, but I don't mean it how it sounds, but it's like she was almost the one who kind of needed to change her personality in that way the most.
mm,
She was sort of, the pushover, the person who worked herself into just not speaking to people for months. She kind of needed to find that other side of her that will stand up for things.
mm. Yeah.
I mean, that said, she wears this mask here, and with Lot, she doesn't actually really wolf him into working with her. Like, she actually connects with him. Because there's like the moment where he starts to get really prickly about her asking him to stop building up his army. And then she's like, oh, no, it's just, we just don't want to attract attention. And that kind of speaks to that echoey repeat in him and like gets him to calm down.
Mm.
And I was like, that's not a very wolf move. That's like a classic Avery move of like, yeah, just connecting to someone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's a very friendly style move.
Like, it's not an all or nothing thing. Maybe that's where it's
No.
sort of going with her. It's like, yeah, you have you have the wolf and the deer inside you, and you got to give both of them a bit of room.
Yeah, I guess Avery is taking lessons from the wolf without leaning fully into being a wolf.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm. Um, so yeah, Avery's with Lot, and suddenly Dish arrives. Lot and Dish both notice that there's a breach in the perimeter, and Avery, rapidly joined by more allies, head out to investigate.
I love like Dish just like shares her sight with Avery,
Mm.
and it's like they can do that. Like I thought we were just getting over how cool it was that she can do that with Snowdrop, her familiar, and then to find out like she can just sort of work with these spirits they've put on the perimeter in such a tangible way. I was like, God, this is so cool. Like this is almost better than what the barrier used to be because the spirits are able to tell them exactly where the breach was.
Yeah, it's definitely a very cool one, isn't it? Yeah, and the fact that they're more sentient than the old barrier was, I think, is
Yeah.
wonderful.
Well, and again, I love how like Dish and Lot come with her. Like she has that moment where she finds out
Mm.
the wolves are breaking in, and she has this moment where it's like a classic Avery thing. She like texts like Lucy, Zed, and Verona, and she's almost thinking they probably won't get there in time, but at least now they'll notice I'm missing. And it's just like, oh, for
Mm.
fuck's sake, Avery, like, you know. And then yeah, so that that she runs off thinking she's alone, and then she just has like these two, this spirit and this wraith sort of flanking her, and they have her back, and they're like moving as a team really well, and it's just like the sort of hype I felt as she got into that like team mode with the two of them, and they all three of them kind of instantly got in sync. I was like, oh, this is awesome! Like it's exactly what Avery needed, and it's cool as hell.
Mm. Yeah, I think this is such a wonderful extension of of uh of what Avery's been all about this entire story, right? Like she goes off to run off for this fight. Dish and Lot start coming with her, and she's like, "Oh, what? You're coming with me?" And then they do. And then even as she's going, Snow comes based on the sense that she's about to be in trouble, and then she texts, the rest of the gang for help, and they show up as well. Like Avery's forming connections strat is just paying off so well, and it's just such a satisfying, example of how far she has come in terms of befriending everybody that she comes across.
Yeah, I wish Verona could appreciate that. I'm thinking back to last week when Verona was mad, everyone had to come and help her. Whereas like Avery, yeah, it's just the opposite. Avery was like, "Oh shit, guess I have to go do this alone." And then the two boundary spirits join her. Then Snowdrop and some goblins do. Then Zed shows up. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. So yeah, they head to the breach and find the culprits, a pack of wolves. These Marisica enhanced fauna ephemera wolves, plus other animals, I suppose, have come to town.
I love how Avery sort of explains the way that it's like there's this weird unnatural thing to the wolves, like not just the way the light falls on them and the colors, but the way that's like this one's clearly like a boy wolf and that one's clearly a girl wolf, and there's like this gender to their shape that isn't actually how it is in nature. Because that just like immediately made me think of like how Disney movies totally do that. Like you can instantly pick what gender an animal is supposed to be just on like the sharpness of the corners on their body and stuff. Like I like Lion King definitely did that. And I just love how instantly that sort of sells you on, oh yeah, these are definitely these like artificially constructed fairy animals.
Yeah.
Because of course the fairy are doing, Disney bullshit of, insisting these animals express gender in all these unnatural ways.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's very cartoony. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like the Kenneteers explicitly call them out as cartoony next chapter. And it's just like I'm continuing to love this idea. I think we said this when they were first introduced by Yorme, but just the idea of fucking evil serial killer Disney animals is very fun.
Yeah, 100%. Princess Mercica has sicked these singing birds onto the Kenneteers.
Oh, actually, not just animals, because there's some little human-ish babies, which is a nice surprise.
Yeah, nice and creepy. I want to talk about when they start to fight. When Avery and Avery tries to talk it out with the wolves, but basically that's not going to happen, and they start to break out in a fight.
So they do the clever girl maneuver from Jurassic Park on her.
Yes, the wolves basically almost trick Avery into going for a talking, and then other wolves kind of sneak around and start attacking. But Lot possesses Avery, or Avery tries to get Lot to possess a stick, but Lot needs to possess Avery as well. And the impression that Lot leaves Avery with when he possesses her is he was a guy who'd hurt his friends really, really badly. And as soon as that comes up, we immediately know this is Avery's worry, is that she's about to do that exact same thing. And it's just like lines like that, like my jaw drops in awe of Wildbow's ability to just have these seemingly random character threads and beats connect and augment and uplift each other so effectively. Like, I didn't think that when we first met Lot in this chapter,
Yeah.
I didn't think, oh, Lot attacked his friends. Oh, that's just kind of like how Avery's about to abandon her friends. But as soon as, like, of course, Wabo uses it to perfectly, enhance these beats, and it's just so wonderful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I'm the same as you. I did not connect that to Avery when we got his description, and then the moment she did, I was like, "Fucking, of course!" Like, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. His ability to put this stuff together is just, yeah, really impressive.
yeah,
And yeah, I love how quickly this fight sort of escalates, because at first I was like, "Oh well, they don't stand a chance. These are giant like magic super wolves, and we've got like what Cherry Pop and Buddy McButt."
hmm,
But it's like these little goblins, they just continue to be the perfect counter for big elaborate fairy schemes, and it's always fun.
yeah.
It's like, Woodpecker Snot and Cherry Pop essentially outplayed Marisica. It's just like this should not work. Like,
Yeah.
I'd be so frustrated if I was a fairy and I'm doing all this complex shit, and like Cherry Pop yelling at me like does the trick. Like, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. But that's just how goblins and fae interact, right? The bluntness of a goblin is, despite it being so unthought out, always counteracts fairy so effectively.
Yeah, yeah, it would just be so frustrating if you were the fairy doing all this elaborate shit, and it's just because you think about it the other way, and it's just like the goblins just kind of get annoyed at how the fairies carry on, whereas like the fairy is setting up this fucking house of cards, and then a goblin's just pulling some off the bottom. Like it's
Mm,
just it's it's so much shittier, and I love it.
mm.
Uh, Also, the last bit before we sort of cut to this flashback here, I love so when Avery like fully lets Lot in, and she sort of makes contact with his eyes, and she's like, "Hey, you might want to send your pups and babies away. If you want to pick this fight, there's a chance that seeing you get your ass kicked will scar them for life." And it's just like I just read that and I was like, "Fuck!" I forget that Avery's a badass now.
Yeah, it's hardcore. I love it.
Like, I mean, I guess Lot's helping, but like that was definitely at least half Avery.
Yeah. So yeah, we flash back to earlier today. Avery is meeting with Miss and Toadie to discuss various matters. The first question is, can Miss help Avery get in with the cool finders who want her to marry their son?
I was thinking that when they were talking about what price could they charge the Garricks, I was thinking Jude's hand's going to get thrown in there. Like she can ask for whatever, and they'll be like, "Oh, we'll do that," and
And we'll throw
maybe
in you
Jude,
marrying Jude. Yeah, exactly.
not realizing that is
That's not sweetening the pot.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is in fact not haggling in the right direction.
Hmm.
Yeah, I bet what jumped out to me at first in this is like Toad Swallow is basically prepping Miss with like what to do while he's asleep. And I thought that was super interesting because I remember reading, don't goblins like sleep for as long as koalas or something? It's like 20 hours a
Yeah.
day or something.
Yeah, definitely.
And I was like, the last time we saw Toad Swallow and Miss, it kind of felt like there was tension between them because Toad Swallow was getting a little annoyed that Miss was like kind of backseat leading the town and not like running stuff past him.
Mm.
And I just thought it was interesting that we cut to a few days later, and I guess they've made their peace because Toadswallow is like trusting her to keep everything on course while he sleeps. I don't know, yeah, just interesting that Miss has been back for not that long, and she's already kind of snuck her way back into de facto running the town half the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's nice that their trust has grown.
Yeah, we see some interesting, like they're both talking about their long-term plans here, and you can see how they're both pushing the town in different directions, but not completely mutually exclusive ones. So there's not extreme tension between them yet.
Yeah, which is nice. Hopefully it doesn't flare up again.
Yeah,
Yeah. The way Miss is interacting here gives me real flashbacks to the early interactions we had with Miss, the most suspicious ones, where she was like Faye-esque in her desire to not give straight answers and use growth moments. Like, Avery keeps asking her like, "Oh, how much should I charge for this? How much? What about this? What about that?" And it's good. Miss does use this as teaching moments, but it's just, I guess it was just nice to have a thing that felt low stakes again after we've been super high stakes and every answer has been life or death, and now these ones aren't, which is quite nice.
yeah. No, I totally get what you mean about it feeling like kind of old school. Like she just Miss has like all these moments. She's just still can't help but avoid the concept of a label. Like when she starts talking about what her relationship is with Avery, like are we
Mm,
friends, mentor, like other and practitioner or whatever. And
mm,
as soon as Avery sort of starts to pick one, Miss is like, oh, we don't need to, no labels. Like it was just, yeah, like that classic Miss of, yeah, she can't commit to anything because that kind of goes against everything she stands for. Um,
mm.
and what that also means is, yeah, in these conversations, since you can't commit to anything, including just giving you the answers, you have to go on this fucking long-winded speech around the point so that you make it for yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, yeah, for me, this is sort of, I guess, like uh, the meaty part of the chapter, like the part where we do the main discussion of like the main idea that Avery's juggling this chapter, which is like this idea. She was like, "Oh, can't I just give the information to the Garricks kind of for free because then they'll owe me and they'll return the favor." And Miss and Toadstool basically have to like pull her into reality and be like, "Or they just will take advantage of you."
Mm,
And I don't know, like again, this is one of those things that's come up all throughout the story, and it's just a really fun quandary because, like on one page, Avery's right that in an ideal world, you don't have to turn everything into like a professional transaction. Like
mm,
people would just be like Bree, where Bree was like, "Hey, I owe you guys one. You did me a really solid. Like I want to make it up to you." And because the Kenneteers are also good people, that relationship has gone very well. But not everyone's like that. Like if sometimes you need to I get as Lucy says next chapter, sometimes you need to sort of stoop down to their level and treat it a bit more like business. But then if you're doing that too much, you're not really helping it be a world where that isn't the default.
yeah, to be honest, I also feel like people just have different conceptions of like equivalence for things, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like trusting favors isn't. If I do someone a favor, I don't do it with the expectation of, and now you will do me a favor of equal value in the future, right? Like, if I want something from somebody, it's better to just be very clear about that rather than do something for them and then hope that they'll do something for me in return later. I just feel like
Yeah.
it's not the right way to do it. It just will lead to problems.
No, but like I guess the thing is though, if you are just doing stuff for people, I think there is like a kind of implicit general
Mm,
this will bring us closer and you would, have my back if I need it or like, as Avery says, it doesn't like, it's a friendship. You don't have to like keep track of how even you are.
mm,
But at the same time, like the Garricks or like, if you did something like this for Alexander, he's not gonna ever give you anything back. Like
mm,
you're just getting taken advantage of. So it's like the thing between that line of like in an ideal world you could just give this shit away for free and assume that it will be used well and if the opportunity to help you comes back they would do it because you're closer now that you did them a solid one time. But that like other people may not think that way and then you're just gonna get milked for shit and taken advantage of.
mm. Yeah, I also kind of agree with what Miss says here of like Avery is asking for this information from Miss. And so Avery doing a favor for the Garricks is requiring her to leverage a favor or leverage, you know, the relationship she has with Miss. And I feel I think Miss is right that it would be disrespectful for to Miss to give away that information for nothing as well, right? Like, yeah,
Well,
I
yeah,
don't know.
that's like the really clever play Miss does here is she basically is like, we need to cut it 50-50 because now you're incentivized to get a good deal because it
Mm,
affects me as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Which I was like, that's very clever because that's exactly the sort of reinforcement Avery needs of like,
Mm,
Avery's not going to be selfish for herself, but she probably will do it for someone she's close to, like Miss. Um, but at the same time, I think Miss is living up to the good friend sort of stuff that Avery wants to, because, like, honestly, Miss could have asked for greater than a 50-50 cut. Miss could have added extra conditions onto it, but Miss doesn't. She's like, hey, 50-50 seems fair. There's two of us like we're in this together, and I trust you to get a good deal. Like Miss kind of lets it be the sort of deal Avery wants, where it's with a friend, and there's like none of the quid pro quo stuff attached, but then points her like uses that part of the deal to then point her at the others and make that part the quid pro quo section.
Yeah.
Like honestly, like sort of looking at this, I was like, Miss could ask for 80-20 and it would be fair. Like Miss
Yeah, I mean,
is
it's all Mrs.
doing,
Info, 100%.
like so I think like Miss is really good and like that Miss lives up to what Avery wants the world to be, which is just trusting each other and being friends, but in a way that means that Avery won't do that for this other deal where she probably can't count on that being the case.
Yeah.
Because I remember Reed and Y talked about this in 12.z. Like Reed mentioned when those people in France were like dying and he was there to help them and he needed something from them, but he still charged them to save their lives or whatever. Because he was like, that way they value the work I do. And obviously that's like a shitty example from a shitty person. But he's not wrong that that's kind of how people work. Like if you put your value on yourself and your actions like that, other people will internalize it. I'm thinking of like, when a mobile game asks me to make a 99-cent transaction, but it's free to play and I'm disgusted, but then Nintendo asks me to pay $60 for a Zelda remake and I do it without hesitation.
Yeah.
Like, like in fact, Nintendo's actually been quite open. They like never let their games go down in price. Like, 7-year-old games still go for retail price, and Nintendo like have talked about how from a business perspective, it's like they do that because they want people to value their games moving forward, and they think that that is how they do that. Like, their games don't get cheaper because they're still as good as they were. Is sort of their argument.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, like I don't know, I kind of hate that that is the way it is because I agree. I'd love to live in Avery's world where everyone just does things and counts on the other person reciprocating and being nice in return, but you can't.
Yeah.
Um,
The other thing that we get into after the Garricks is Miss talking about, well, just in general, kind of talking about her plans. Avery confronts about what she saw in the Carmine Alcazar and all that jazz. And I think we already knew a lot of this stuff, but it's nice to just kind of revisit it.
Yeah, I guess for me, like for quite a while now, I feel like I've been hyping up like learning Miss's plan, and I guess I just sort of overestimated how much of an intricate plan she had. I forgot she's not a fairy. Like yeah, in the end, her whole scheme kind of amounts to yeah, as you said, what we already sort of knew, which is just she wanted to create an advertisement for
Yep.
or like a version of the practice that doesn't suck ass. And like we've always sort of known that's what the Kenneteers were, but I guess I just for some reason had convinced myself Miss had bigger, grander plans. But no, she just yeah, she just wants practitioners who are really strong, have a better way of getting that power to sort of slowly convince more and more people that that is the way it should be done. Because
Yeah.
she's right, it is. Even with all this Carmine shit, I'm still like the Kenneteers are a better way of doing this than like a Bellinger or a Musser.
Yeah, I mean, when the Kenneteers were at the BHI, we kind of saw the attention they were getting and were able to put together that was part of the plan. But yeah, it's nice to just kind of revisit some of Mrs. scheming and confirm it, I suppose.
Yeah, although it is interesting because it's definitely one of those plans where like she's talking, like maybe over hundreds of years, a few more Kennets might get set up. And, this will slowly nudge one aspect of this problematic system.
Yeah.
And like that's definitely a very long-term slow play, which if somebody like Edith is like, I'm not really interested in waiting hundreds of years for phase 1 to take place.
Yeah.
I'm not really going to begrudge her because she's suffering like right now. Like, we've talked about this in other contexts as well, but like, when you're talking about doing such slow, gradual change like this, there is the argument for the people who are being oppressed to not be super okay with generations of slow change, because they have to suffer in the meantime. So I could kind of see why someone like Rook kind of has Mrs. back, but isn't all in on Mrs. plan.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought.
I mean, Rook is probably giving it a chance because Rook, perhaps better than anyone else, knows that a strong revolution just kind of leads to what Miss and Toadsolo talk about here. You just end up replacing it with the same people, but almost worse.
Yeah.
There's plenty of real life revolutions to use as examples for that as well. But yeah, like this is a plan where I'm like, I love part of it, but like, it's slow.
I mean, Miss says any plan that would have this effect probably will take time or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, yeah, well, exactly. Like, we're seeing with the Carmine shit right now, these sorts of big revolutions that Charles Edith and sort of Marisica are trying to lead. It's just it's going to tip everything on its head. But like they're right that it'll resettle into some different flavor of the same toxic. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me is like thinking if this was Mrs. Plan, just like she wanted her practitioners that or practitioner that would be her ambassador for this better way of practice. How is that better with the Carmine dead? Because that's the thing that comes up here is like Toadswallow kind of learns, oh, Miss let the Carmine Beast die because it was better for her plan
Mm,
if Carmi wasn't in the picture.
mm.
I'm curious how that is. Like, why is Carmi being gone better for Mrs. Advertising campaign?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it that she pretty instantly clocked that like John or the Hungry Choir would be in it, and then the Carmine would be more tied to Kennet, or
Or
I don't know.
yeah, maybe the fact that there's more kind of the Carmine Bloods influencing Kennet will allow them to make the Kenneteers more powerful somehow, something like that.
Or maybe just that the turmoil would distract people from this being her plan. Like,
Mm,
because if the Kenneteers had just shown up at the Blue Heron in the summer and the Carmine Beast wasn't dead, all of the scrutiny would have just sort of been focused on where the fuck did these kids come from.
mm,
Whereas I guess with all the Carmine stuff going on, that almost like Mossad doesn't give a shit about the Kenneteers. He's figuring out what's going on with the town as a whole, like and with the Carmine stuff. But yeah, I'm gonna assume that's it until we until we learn otherwise. Just that it's like the Carmine's just a distraction from her main ploy.
yeah, maybe we'll have to see. Maybe there is a final twist left in Mrs. Plan.
Yeah, and Miss does give us some tips about the promenade. It's basically just Peach's castle from Mario 64.
Mm,
And I'm still I feel like I've been saying this for arcs now. I don't see when we're going to fit in another trip to the promenade in this story, but I'll be livid if we don't get it because it continues to get hyped up.
yeah,
Like, yeah, the fact that we learned that like the idea is you do have to leave and come back, and you do like a variant of another path. Like Avery, like doing trying to cross the promenade and ending up back on a variant of the Forest Ribbon Trail as part of her. Like it just
yeah,
or something like that. It has to happen.
yeah, yeah. I hope it will. I mean, yeah, we almost certainly we need to get back to the promenade for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know,
Is that just going to have to be like the day before? Like,
but it would be so crazy. What reason does Avery have to go to the promenade at this point? Like, just to
well,
take a break from all the other hectic stuff that's going on.
I was actually thinking about that, and because Avery's talking about what can she ask the Garricks to pay her for Mrs. Stuff. I have an idea of something she can charge them. Help with this Kennet situation. Like,
Yeah,
give her
true.
all the weird findery trinket bullshit stuff that they can spare for a
Mm,
loan even. Like, hey, can I borrow fucking everything I can get for a week in exchange for this info? Like, that's a good
mm,
price. Maybe not ideal for Mrs. 50/50 cut, like work out how that works. But I feel like Miss would be on board with, hey, why don't we get a bunch of extra ammunition for the next few days?
yeah,
Send Jude.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. So maybe that's it. Maybe she'll like agree to sort of show the Garricks some of these tips are legit in exchange for getting a bunch of their help, and that would justify her doing that like the day before the final countdown
The
day.
final, yeah, the final thing. Yeah, I could see it. We'll see. Yeah, the fact that the Garricks and the Promenade keep getting mentioned when it seems like there isn't enough time to visit that in the remainder of the story. You're right. It makes me think something is happening there, but we'll have to see, I suppose.
It'll have to break the countdown though, because that couldn't possibly be one chapter, or it's going
Yeah,
to be like a
3, 2,
90,000 word.
1.5, 1.
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
um, anyway, so yeah, next, Avery calls Snowdrop in and they deliver the news to Toadswallow. They are leaving at the end of the summer.
Fuck, this hurts so much more than I
I
expected.
know, fuck. The thing about this was like Toadie you see Toady almost kind of play it off that this is like hurting, that he's going to be losing his sage, blah blah blah. But clearly, it hurts him on such a personal level as well. And I kept thinking during all this, like, if this is so hard to read, imagine what it's going to be like when Lucy and Verona find out.
Yeah, well, like I'm gonna have a go at Avery next chapter for not telling Lucy,
Yeah,
but also reading this part, you're like, oh god, she can't tell Lucy and Verona before she leaves.
Ugh.
Yeah, I love the pull because like Toad Sawyer talks a lot about how it's going to affect his plans, and like that is true, that's certainly where some of the hurt is coming from. But like,
Yeah.
I totally agree with you that he's playing up how much of it is that.
Mm.
There's this great moment where he well, actually, so the first great moment is where his like facade drops a bit, and he starts speaking more like Gashwad. It's just been like, it's good, don't worry about it, like as opposed to his fake posh accent. Because I don't think we've seen many things, like not much has gotten through that facade in this entire story. So it really, like, that moment lands for you very strongly.
Yeah, 100%.
And then he sort of takes it so well, and it's like as he's leaving, there's this moment where he's sort of like, he basically sort of says the reason this hurts so much is because mispicked such good, like wonderful people. And then then he just like he just sort of, he takes it so well. Like I guess you could expect him to chuck a tantrum, or like if he was in it entirely for the business, try to buy them, but he's very accepting of like, that's not going to work. I understand your decision. Like I hate this, but I'll support it. Yeah, like it's almost the fact that he takes it so well that makes it hurt.
Yeah, 100%.
He gets to fart in the room above a bit later, which helps.
Yeah, at least that's something. But so yeah, we jump back to the present. Avery and the goblins are struggling against the menagerie of fey beasts. But just before things get really bad, Zed and Jess show up with a magical wall and save the day.
Yeah, and like a little detail I just wanted to pull out, and if everybody could just pop their tinfoil hats on for a sec.
Hold on, let me just put mine on. Rustle. All right.
So obviously Avery's fighting like wolves here primarily. A snake shows up. But there's one comment where she mentions that there is like a big white stag that's like keeping to the shadows and is shy. And obviously this is like on one level just really neat imagery for sort of like how Avery is in this moment embracing the wolf part of herself to fight these wolves and pushing the stag part of herself down and out of the fight. But like the other thing that jumped out to me about this stag is it's like a big white stag. She comments on the fact that it's like hair, fur. I don't know what. We don't have deers here. Its covering is white. And I was just like, oh, interesting, a white deer as well as like a big wolfy beast thing. And now they're growing little human people. There's just a lot of these fauna ephemera. There's a lot in their pack that aligns with the build up of the judges in a way that made me start to rustle about whether the Carmine seat is the only one they have in their sights.
Yeah, it's a good point. Maybe there is more that they want to do. That would be bonkers, right? What if Maricica's twist is that she actually doesn't care about the Carmine role and she's going after the alabaster?
So I think the thing with these Fey ephemera is I don't know how much they are Maricica's. Like I'm sure she's pointed them here and helped put them in on this path to some degree, but like I think we learnt that they were probably made by Phinia, or at least she was working with them for a long time as well. So like it could just be like this isn't all Maricica's ploy, but she's just using it. So like basically what I'm saying is she may not even care about the fact that these guys are going to then start going after other seats as well.
Yeah, true. Just a distraction or something else she can throw in the Kenneteers' lap for them to have to deal with.
So yeah, I don't know. This is probably nothing, but I just saw white stag and just started connecting dots.
Yeah. The wolf that throws knives, that's pretty fun. I don't care what Avery says later. It's hilarious.
No, I'm 100% on Avery's side here. This is dumb as hell.
Nah, it's awesome. A wolf throwing knives? You kidding me? That's dope. Fuck off, Avery.
Well, okay, so first of all, what it does is it has them in its mouth and it throws them in the air and then like turns around and kicks them at her.
It's so goofy. I love it.
It reminds me of, I can't remember where you stood on this. Like in Dark Souls, there was that big dog with a sword coming out of its mouth.
Mm,
That was the
yes.
stupidest shit ever. Like I was glad to put that thing out of its misery. Like,
Yeah, I don't know.
like it looks lame as hell. There's the
It's
Pokemon
goofy,
Gen 8.
but it's also badass. Things can be goofy and badass at the
Uh,
same time, Elliot.
Things can be goofy and badass. This is not that. This is just
Nah, it
goofy.
is. It's awesome.
No, yeah, I was 100% on Avery's side when she starts talking about that. I also love how Avery's like, yeah, it's, it was like really dumb that they were doing that. And Verona's like, oh yeah, really clever. Attack their glamour and like think about the strategy, but it's like Avery. So she was just like,
Yeah, that's
no,
obviously not what she was
it's just
doing.
dumb. Like, yeah. So like Verona's always thinking about the extra, angle of attack, whereas Avery's just, this is Avery, she just says what she's thinking and she thinks that it's dumb. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I also wanted to call out Zed, once again slotting into this role of like he shows up to help Avery, and as he sort of enters the space as the fauna ephemera run off, he just he just goes up to Avery and sort of says, there are some practitioners who basically never get into fights, and like we've talked about him doing this a couple of times already this arc, and I think the arc before as well. But I love this role he's slotting into of the story as like the guy who is just constantly reminding us that the shit that is going on right now is fucking insane. Because obviously the Kenneteers' lives have been insane since they first awoke, and I think it would be easy to lose perspective on the fact that like the average practitioner probably spends most of their time reading shit and like drawing diagrams and stuff.
Mm.
Like it is wild that the Kenneteers on a essentially day-to-day basis
You
get
have
in
to deal with
fights for their
such wild
lives.
stuff. Yeah.
And like because Avery, as she's doing this fight, she's doing the classic Kenneteer slash real life person thing of like, oh, Lucy would be better at this, blah blah blah.
Mm.
And it's like you fought off a pack of super magic wolves with a stick and some air boots. Like that shit's crazy, Avery. What are you talking about? And I think like having Zed come in and constantly remind us that this shit is wild, like helps raise those stakes and remind us like how big and epic this part of the story really is.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Zed's role has basically been to be in awe of just how wonderful and powerful the Kenneteers are, which is a pretty good role. We need it for sure.
Yeah, I'll never get sick of it. Like somebody constantly telling the like protagonists that they're fucking insanely good at everything will just
Hmm.
always like be fun.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So yeah, the gang recuperates from their fight, but are interrupted when Y emerges and almost begs for their help.
He offers to.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I as soon as he sort of came out and started playing the like damsel in distress, I was just like fucking augurs because there's a part of me that can't help but think this is some sort of ploy.
Mm.
I don't think it is. Like I continue to believe that Y is somebody we can turn to the good side.
Mm.
But he also like he makes that opinion really like delightfully hard to maintain in this conversation because it's like there's all these moments like everything he says is like he's like, oh, I don't agree with Massa, but I will continue to enable him. And it's like, Reed needs a friend right now. And I'm like, it's
Mm.
actually really good that one of your motivations is to stick by your friend.
Yes.
Shame it's Reed though.
Yeah, there's the bit where he's like, "Oh, Reed is a good guy," and I think it's Verona who's like, "Might be
Yeah.
a gain set on that one, pal."
I see. I do agree with Y's overall point there, which is like Y does make the case for like he didn't really have the opportunity to
Yes.
be less of a shithead in the environment he grew up in.
Yeah, I guess we
And
don't know how bad it could have been, but it definitely isn't great.
yeah, oh no, like I'm not saying that he's not like a shit cunt, but I'm
Mm,
saying that it's hard to blame him for that when
yes.
his dad raised him. Like, this gets back into that thing of where do you draw the line? Because, I don't feel that same way for Abe, whereas you can probably make the same argument for Abe. So I don't know exactly where I draw the line. It's probably somewhere around 18, admittedly. But
Mm,
um I don't know, like, yeah, looking at Reed, I kind of almost just feel, yeah, sorry for him. I guess like why again, hopefully this is just one of those things where Reed will take the opportunity to grow as a person having lost all this stuff.
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Y just continues to be like so close to being like Nicolette,
Mm.
where you're like, Nicolette was a bit shitty at first, but we really turned her around, and she's definitely team goodies at the
Yeah.
moment. And it's just like I can see that happening to Y so easily, but it's also so far away at the same time, especially since his contract with Massa goes for like another week. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I just
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, this moment is so funny. There's obviously a bit of like wondering if this is some conspiratorial type of play, but it doesn't seem like it. It seems like Y is being genuine. But I don't like. Did he really expect that Nicolette would just be, or any of them would just be like, "All right, I'll join your team for a few days"? Like, it just seems. I don't know what Y was expecting.
he really gives off vibes in this section of like somebody who is not at all ready for the job he is now trying to do.
Yeah.
Like, because like we know from like the Borrowed Eyes comic and stuff that Alexander was setting him up to be his replacement.
Yes.
But I think both of them probably thought that was a good 20 years away. Um, I do
Yeah.
not think Y is ready for this job, and I think that's starting to hit him.
Mm.
Um, Again, this is all coming through this lens of me ensuring that my read is that we can fix him and just
Yeah.
ignoring the signs that this could be a ploy.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I'm assuming he's in within the realms of reachable as well.
but like I love that they bring Nicolette in for this conversation because not only does she have like much more of a personal history with Y than us or any of the other characters, but she also like as his sort of new business rival and another member of the same company, is able to like question the business side because I think a lot of the time he's falling back on stuff like, well, I can't do this because my contract goes for 7 more days. And so then we get to have Nicolette just be like, Alexander said not to do dumb shit like that. Like that's a bad contract. And then he's like, "Oh well, it's like a long-standing
Yeah.
client. I thought, you know, it should be fine, and I didn't think things would go south this quickly." And Nicolette's like, "Yeah, Alexander said to not do that exact shit as well." Yeah. Not only is she able to connect with Y on this much more like we're the same way, but just the way she's able to cut down his excuses and really invalidate how he's running his business now. Yeah, I was so glad. I really liked how Wildbow brought her in to add this angle of kind of challenging Y's competence, and I reckon he's probably taking that to heart.
I mean, yeah, maybe being knocked down a peg would be useful for Y.
Because I kind of had the impression from 12.z that with Reed out of the picture, the slimy version of Y would just like transition to like being Raquel's, confidant or something.
Mm,
Like if you assume that he's just here, to keep the Musses like in bed with the Bellingers, like keep the two
mm.
families close. You think that like now that Reed's out of the picture, he would just like, oh well, go to whoever is the next heir or the next important Musser. And I guess I like hearing that Reed is still his friend because I'm like, oh, there's like some genuine stuff there.
Yeah, there's a bit of genuine camaraderie there. It's not just a friendship of, of
Yeah.
a political friendship.
Yeah, exactly. And they sort of talked around that in 12.z, but it's good to see it. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I just I can't help but root for Why to just I feel like, when he lost Reed, he's sticking around and he's still talking about Reed, and I'm sort of like, okay, so if you were just here for the Musses and now like really the Musser that you were friends with and the one who you were kind of grooming to be your best buddy as he becomes the 2IC of the family, like he's out of the picture now. And if Y is still talking about him, it sort of tells me that Y hasn't just like moved on to sucking up to a different muscle. And so I'm like, oh, okay, so you weren't just here to suck up to the muscles. You were doing that in part because you liked Reed.
Mm.
So that's I guess sorry, it took me a while to find that point. I'm a bit all over the place mentally today, but yeah, I guess that's the thing that gives me hope is that like Y isn't just here to suck up to the muscles. He was here because he was friends with one of them, and that's in part why he was doing it. And now that Reed's out of the picture, he is pushing back on them a little bit more. And this is just that shred of hope I really didn't need.
Mm. Yeah.
Also, sorry to jump back to Nicolette a bit.
Yeah.
She also mentions she will try to talk to Raquel, which I found super interesting just because, to your point before, Nicolette makes a connection between her and Raquel that I had not made, but seemed obvious in retrospect. That, like, Nicolette is like, I kind of get where Raquel is with the whole, like, hurting yourself and committing to a bad path in order to get the approval of someone who doesn't give a shit about you.
Mm.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's where Nico was at the start of this story. Maybe we just got to do to Raquel what they did to Nicolette, and we
Yeah,
can fix
true.
her.
I mean, they've kind of tried to do that though, right? Like,
Well,
hasn't really worked.
not really. They've tried talking to Raquel, but they didn't really try talking to Nicolette until after they blew her face up with glamour. So I'm saying we go back to that step.
Oh yeah. So blow up
Just
Raquel's face with glamour and then try and talk
yeah,
to her.
or something equivalent. I don't know, just sort of some grievous bodily harm that isn't permanent, and then when they're shook up, then you get in there and manipulate their worldview. It's ethical.
Yeah, easy peasy. I want to
yeah.
call out during this bit how on fire Lucy is on fucking taking Y down a peg. Because first we get this line where Avery is explaining to Lucy, saying, Y turned up a bit after Zed did, saying he didn't want there to be hard feelings. And Lucy's response is, how convenient for you.
Yeah.
And then Y says, the alpha, if you want to call it that. Not that alphas are a thing in animals or humans. It's only ever scared bluster. Like Mussa? Lucy asked. And it's just so fucking, like, she's so on fire. It's great.
And even Y has a little chuckle at that like muscle line, doesn't he? Like,
Yeah, he smirks at it, as you
yeah.
would.
Yeah, because it's a fucking sick burn. Yeah. No, you're right. Like, because I do really like that. Because yeah, when Y first comes up and is like, "Hey, just making sure there's no hard feelings," it's very much like, oh, "Fuck off, mate." Like, you don't get to work for the other side and enable someone like Muster and then come up
Yeah.
and be like,
No hard
technically I'm just in the
feelings.
background.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
it's like he only started to really win me over when he turned the attention to Raquel and Reed. And because like that's the part I also really want to talk about is basically so Y seems very confident that Musser is putting up a candidate and that candidate will be either Reed or Raquel, and essentially those two are currently in tryouts for who will get to be the Carmine candidate of the Mussers. And I'm curious,
Yeah.
who do you think it should
Yeah,
be?
I was about to ask you the same question. I mean, there's no good options, right? If it's Reed or Raquel, those are both bad options. Both for the Mussers and just for the Kenneteers and for all involved. Yeah. Who do I think it would be more horrifying if it was? I guess I think it will be more dramatically and narratively interesting if it's Raquel. So then I think it'll be Raquel.
I have to agree. I think Raquel's the one that's more like Reed has kind of been defeated, and as much as it's like there's a thing in him digging deeper as he tries to go there, I think Raquel, like Raquel's the shovel queen in that regard, like the way she's been digging into the Muster philosophy.
Mm.
I see her being in the position to just do this, and I think from Abe's perspective, like just thinking about the way Reed thought about Raquel and women in general. I can see this vibe from from Abe of Reed failed, whereas Raquel hasn't necessarily failed. She just didn't get a chance. Like he may think of her in this way of like she's competent, but she just can't be a proper member of the family. So the idea of her getting to be the Carmine as a sort of permanent ally might actually gel with him. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I agree. It'll be funner for the actual contest.
Mm.
Just from the Kenneteers' perspective, because she's the one that's more on their level.
Yeah.
And I mean, and that's the other interesting thing about this is the thing that jumped out to me is like Massa is not the sort of person who's going to enter someone into this competition and like sponsor a candidate without basically assuring he's going to win, right? Like
100%. Like he wouldn't play without trying to win. Why bother?
yeah, which means fuck knows what he has up his sleeve that apparently can pretty much guarantee his victory here. But then the other side of that is Marissa invited him. She must have known that this was in the cards, that he would do this if it's, sort of happened this way.
Mm.
So then the other part of me is thinking, forget whatever fuck off powerful thing Massa has that will guarantee him the victory. The fuck does Marissa have up her sleeve that's going to undo it? Like,
yeah, I don't know.
It has to be Charles donning the furs, right? Like the extra claim you get from being the one to wear the furs. Maybe she's assuming, or she's tricked Muster into thinking that somebody coming with the furs is not an option.
Mm.
And then and then we come back to the whole thing of like this could be. I think we've talked about it a lot, but we've theorized that Marissa's plan is to make Kenneth want Charles to put the furs on, and that's
Mm,
why they've never been upset that the furs were taken. And maybe this is how, like, if Mossa is going to win unless Charles puts the furs on,
mm.
that is a situation where I think a lot of others in Kennet would like vote to
Would
let
vote Charles rather.
Charles do it.
Yeah.
And that's why it wouldn't matter that he's captured by Ray, because basically Marisica is conspiring to have a vote where where the Kennet others will basically get the Kenneteers to ask for Charles to come back.
Yeah, I mean, if the question is raised of would you rather have Marisica or Mussa in charge of Kennet, I don't know. You're right. It's a tough question. There's not an immediate answer.
Yeah, I think there are enough, like, I think, like, Miss and Rourke and the Kenneteers would probably still not vote for Charles to put the furs on. But I'm
Mm,
thinking so many of the other goblins, like your Nibble and your Chloe, like, they're the people who, faced with that decision, I think they're just going to say, let Charles do it.
yeah, I think so.
And I think the idea that all of this will amount to Marisica putting somebody like Mossa in a position to win, like, it's a scare tactic. It's manipulating the voters with a scare tactic. She's going to come in
Mm,
because she's got that thing. They're like, oh, we're going to hear her out if she comes back to town. She's going to come in, call this vote, basically say it's either Mossa or my plan with Charles.
mm,
They're gonna, and then like, use this scare tactic to manipulate the vote. It feels very thematically appropriate for her to break the democracy, not through like changing its systems, but just by like abusing a weakness in them.
mm. Yeah, I can see that.
So yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see like that. Yeah, but I mean, like, there's so many other contestants being introduced. It's probably going to be a long road before we even get to that vote and Marisica showing up, even if that is the case.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely got a few days left. I guess that leads us to the next chapter, 13.7, still in Avery's head. Lucy and Avery are stopping by a rent-to-own store to investigate a mysterious broadcast about the Chonk.
Chonk, chonk, chonk. Like, honestly, I'm sorry, but like, I hope John dies.
Oof,
It's all about the chonk for me now.
Chonk. You're a hardcore chonker.
I mean, I love this. Like, this fucking screenshots play. It's like, there's meaner goblins, there's bigger goblins, but fewer. This combination of mean, big, and hungry for nipple meat. It's just like, it's this perfect, like, goblin-y fucking WWE wrestler vibe.
Mm,
And it's great because it sort of adds a lighthearted comedy bit to the start of this rent-to-own store as we like get into the messy shit it's about to turn into. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of instantly fell in love with this wrestling vibe and like trying to figure out, like, because I guess before this chapter even came out, I'd started making dumb memes about how this was the 2020 Olympics in Kennet, and like seeing all the hype stuff Ken's accidentally generating is just really playing into that in a fun way. Like, it's, as we're about to hit this deadline where a million fucking things are meant to happen in this story. The idea that we're meeting all these other candidates and there's still stuff getting put on the pile in a kind of goofy, fun way is just really like nice and exciting.
yeah, it's hilarious.
Also, sorry, Breastbiter says that he eats the breasts and the nipples for protein, but like, that's the worst place on the body to get your protein, mate. Like,
maybe that's part of the allure. Is
I guess he has to eat more. Yeah.
So powerful is this goblin that they don't even need to go for the highest source of protein.
But it's like literally the worst. Like, it's got to be the fattiest tissue in the human body, just about. Like, it's like, no wonder he's so big. I guess like his ratio of protein to fats is terrible.
Yeah, this is how he stays in such good shape.
It's a good keto diet though, actually. So the fats probably don't matter so much.
Are you turning on to the diet, Elliot?
Yeah.
You gonna go for it?
I don't know. I'll have to think about it.
All right, let us know. Discussion question for this fortnight: which diet from Bale would you be the most likely to follow? The Hungry Choir diet, the Breastbiter diet? There's a few.
All these fad diets in these story, man.
So yeah, Lucy challenges this blatantly racist shopkeeper, but actually Avery's the one who loses her cool.
And I loved this because, like, as this started, like the last Lucy chapter we read was that one where she was really juggling this whole like, am I the person with the knife or am I the smoke? Like, do I stab or do I, work around things perhaps less effectually?
Mm.
And so I was like, oh, this is challenging that part of Lucy. And then Avery's whole balancing the deer and the wolf thing we were talking about last chapter, I was like, oh, so there's some synergy here, like, Lucy's trying to juggle, how violent versus ineffectual she is.
Mm.
Avery's balancing something very similar, and I was like, oh, okay, they can use this as a launching off point for how this might go. If Lucy starts to go too far and maybe comes up with something she regrets, and it was just like that was the exact opposite of what happens because Lucy's the one who's like, Avery, what the fuck are you doing? Like, I just expected Lucy to be the one who almost popped off, and then Avery would calm her down and they'd talk about it. But it was like the exact opposite of that, and it was very fun.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, you're right. It's a very interesting. I found it a very interesting kind of argument that they would have in general, right? Like it's just a very interesting and complex moral question. The fact that there's a racist here and Lucy is kind of used to having to deal with them, but doesn't want to have to play into the role of kind of aggressively standing her ground. Obviously, that's something she's been focused on a fair amount, and then Avery just kind of does it instead as a way of letting off steam slash dispensing justice. Like it's a very complex piece of tension to put between the two of them, and I just think it's a wonderful one.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like it's and this is something we'll talk about a couple of times this chapter, I think. But as the story feels like it's reaching its climax, the Kenneteers character arcs are doing that as well. And I feel like most of this arc we've been talking a lot about how prominently some of their stuff is really coming to the fore again.
Mm,
And what's really fun about that is because this is Wildbow and each character is kind of juggling a couple of things.
mm,
He's giving himself now, like as they're sort of reaching this climactic moment for all of their character arcs, he's getting to play the similar bits off of each other.
mm,
So there's Avery and her when are you violent, when are you the friend, and Lucy with her when are you violent and when are you potentially ineffectual. Like there's a lot of
mm,
synergy between those two dilemmas, and we get to like play them off each other. And he does the same thing with Avery and Verona later in the chapter. Like it's so cool that I guess with three protagonists, he hasn't just given them their own journeys, but of course parts of their journeys overlap, and so they get to like work off of each other along them. Like it's been that way for a long time, but it's really cool sort of seeing it as they're coming to a head.
mm. Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, as much as I don't really agree with what Snowdrop and Avery did here, like I think Lucy was right that it was a really bad thing. It was fucking hilarious. Like Snowdrop getting to play the wild opossum.
Yeah.
I like the image of the lady walking into her office and Snowdrop is fucking posed ready to piss on her laptop. Like it's just hilarious.
It is very funny, isn't it?
Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
guess this is the whole thing with goblins, and I guess I'm counting Snowdrop in their kind. Like, so many of these things that goblins do. I guess if you really sit down and think about like what they're doing to a lot of innocent people, you're like, it's not really not good, is it? But also, it's usually pretty funny.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
And I guess going back to Lucy's thing, I wanted to go.
Mm.
I really connected with that moment where Lucy does she gets really mad about the fact that this lady won't take her on as a customer, basically, even though she hates the rent to own stores.
Oh yeah.
And I really liked how she sort of justified that it's like, fuck this place, I hate it, but
Mm.
also fuck you even more for not even wanting me here. Like
Yeah.
it's like a super extreme version of like, not getting invited to a party you don't want to go to. Like Lucy hates this place and everything it stands for, but then the idea that this woman also thinks Lucy isn't good enough for them is like that just
It
the fact
makes
that
it
Lucy thinks this
especially
place is shit.
harsh. Yeah.
Well, it makes it doubly hurtful that this woman, like it's
Yeah,
yeah.
if this predatory store doesn't even want to prey on you, that's
Yeah.
like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I just I really appreciated like the way that was sort of throwing Lucy for a loop a bit,
Mm.
and like she needed Avery sort of validate that she was feeling that way because it is a bit like I hate this place, but it is worse that they don't want me, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Um, So yeah, Lucy and Avery head to meet up with the others to chat to Ken, and on the way, Lucy kind of checks in on Avery, and yeah, I mean they have this conversation. Avery kind of opens up a bit to Lucy, and Lucy is being a very good friend here, but Avery refuses to let Lucy in fully.
She just like intentionally doesn't stick the landing, basically. Like
Yeah,
she kind of gets hyped up and like goes right to the point where she's like, "What if I don't see my place ever getting better for years?" And Lucy's like, "Oh,
yeah.
what do you think you could do then?" And then it's just like, "No, actually, I've changed my mind. I'm not gonna fucking confide in you."
Yeah, you
Um,
can really feel the chapter building up to Avery telling Lucy, and then she just cuts herself off, and you feel it. You feel the weight. You feel the tension
yeah,
just not get resolved, just hang there, and it's rough.
yeah, and because it's like I get it. Like I've hated telling friends bad news in the past, and we just saw what it did to Toad Slow. And I totally get why Avery's hesitating, and I'm not gonna
Mm,
lie, I probably would be too.
yeah,
But if I could be hypocritical for a moment, you fucking moron, just tell her. Like, there's no way that this is better. Like Lucy's clearly worried about you and knows something's wrong, and not telling her is not the solution. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just so frustrating. Like, because this is Avery. It feels like this is Avery leaning into that same bad habit she had of, before the story, like not wanting her problems to be other people's problems, and so not reaching out and falling, and that's what causes her to fall under the radar.
Mm, yeah.
Like it's like Lucy basically says to her, "I can't help you with things I don't know about," and Avery's like, "Okay, yep," doesn't tell her a thing. Like,
Yep. The way to solve that problem, Avery, is let her
yeah.
know. But no.
Like, yeah, it's frustrating because it's like I don't know what more Lucy can do here.
Yeah, I mean, Lucy did everything she could. Avery just didn't
Oh yeah, yeah.
play
Avery
ball.
shut it down, and it's just like you're hurting yourself. This is gonna hurt them more. Like I think this is the thing is like it's it's bordering on that kind of sitcom or like dramery trope of like it's gonna hurt them more when they find out later and they find out you didn't want to tell them.
Mm,
Is
yeah.
kind of the vibe, and like this is a situation where I totally get why Avery's doing that, but I'm still just like, oh Avery, you can't be doing this to us.
I really do think Avery could probably tell Lucy. I think it would be
Yeah,
fine. Although that would make it much worse when Verona finds out.
yeah, yeah, it's true. I think she's being a bit silly if she really thinks they can't handle it. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
I think she's being silly by not thinking it's going to come up during the worst possible moment in this conflict. Like,
Oh yeah.
100%, I think either Marissa is going to know about it or, Miss is going to turn out to be evil and will drop it at the pivotal moment or something,
Yeah.
like,
Um, I mean, I've seen people, and I think we maybe called one out from a Power Predictor, but like people have theorized that Marissa giving that gift in Arc 2 of telling Avery there was no one for her in town
mm, mm,
seeded the idea of her needing to leave right
yeah,
back in Arc 2.
yeah.
Um, which is especially sort of makes sense when you think back to I don't know exactly like when the plans for this story changed, but early on this was going to be a shorter story, so like those dots would be much more directly connected in the shorter version of this story.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, and I guess the other thing that really frustrates me is like it's killing Avery to keep this a secret. Like so
Hmm.
much of her last arcs of chapters have been like, oh, it hurts me not to tell them, and whenever Verona says something like, oh, we always have each other's back. Avery's always thinking to herself, I'm a piece of shit. I'm leaving them, and it's like she's completely ignoring the effect this is having on her to keep this a secret.
Mm, yeah.
Um, Also, a quick shout out in this walk segment, we do learn that the wolf leader who is vying for the Carmine throne, his name is Ond Varg, which essentially
Unvarg.
just translates to bad wolf.
Shout out to Doctor Who.
Yeah, I know. So I was trying to pull together a cleverer joke than just being like, look, it's the same as Doctor Who, but I can't think of a genuine connection. But I did get a chuckle out of translating it and getting bad wolf.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, Verona, Ken, and Jessica, Zed, and Bree, whose collective name you've put down in your notes as Jez and Bree,
Yeah.
they all group up and discuss the recent advertising of the Carmine candidates and bump into Louise. Ken basically reveals that he's incidentally behind a bunch of weird stuff that's been going on.
Yeah, but before we get to all that, I do want to call out, like, so we quickly catch up with Verona, and she starts talking about since she's a bit less gainsaid now, she's been able to get better reads on the shit she stole from Cleo and some other stuff. I just want to talk about these items. I always love talking about all the gear these three get because it's always cool as shit. I love this rasp, which is
Mm.
like the thing that will hurt all of your surfaces of the same thing, like that way. Especially just because Verona sort of immediately is like, yeah, you could use it to like shave your whole body. It's just like that. That is so not where I would have gone with it. But I love that she's already thinking of like non-combative, just like useful ways to use this magical item. Whereas I was instantly like, oh yeah, you can cut someone and it'll cut them all over.
Of course, Verona would try and figure out how she can work more magical items into her day-to-day routines.
Yeah, it's very on brand. I mean, like the one that does jump to mind is like you could cut all of your fingernails and toenails at once. Like imagine only
Very
having to
useful.
cut one fingernail and it does all 20 digits.
Mm.
Fucking huge.
Tie a toothbrush bristle to the end of it, and you can brush all your teeth at once. That'd be probably pretty good.
Yeah, I like the idea of shaving. If you could somehow find a way to ward your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to love about it. Oh yeah. I mean the other one is obviously speaking of Doctor Who references, the psychic paper that Cleo had.
Yes.
Um, I love that we finally sort of have one that just has an unknown drawback. Like we've sort of got
And
this
an
rough,
unknown drawback that seems so high stakes as well.
yeah,
Like, isn't Verona like, maybe the drawback is just that you like might die after you use it? It's just like,
or
what the
someone
fuck?
will come to kill you. Like, cause
Yeah.
yeah, she's like, she sort of tied it through the diagnosis thing to like the edge.
Yes.
And so it's like, yeah, we don't really know what this drawback is, but we have a rough thematic map for it, which is, yeah, like suggests maybe something like someone will try to murder you unless you
Yeah.
do this specific thing, which we also don't know. And I just like, I love this because especially if it's in Verona's hands while she's a bit gainsaid and while she still doesn't have her own like specialty, the chances that she'll enter a situation where she sort of has to use this are the highest they're going to be. And I just love the idea of like a chapter where Verona uses this thing to get in somewhere and then is like scrambling to read the clues in her environment for what the fuck she's meant to do as something comes and like tries to kill her or
Yeah.
whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
Like
It's the same drawback as in Jumanji when you accidentally summon the hunter.
yeah, exactly. But like, yeah, what do you have to do to get rid of them? Like,
Mm.
yeah, I think that would be a really fun, like, in the middle of a fight puzzle to solve.
Yeah, 100%.
And yeah, so as you said, we learned that like Ken just did this thing where it was like, I want to keep the Kenneteers informed, and so that's what's been manifesting all these like hype shows and posters for the
Yeah,
candidates.
it does. The impression you get is that it's effectively like promotional wrestling posters and
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
right? Which is wonderful. It's like hilarious, but also a really good reminder of how tangible Ken is. This and the next one, because I think there's been this growing feeling that Ken is going to be
Business.
vitally important somehow to how this plays out, right?
Yeah,
So the more we see of Ken's manifestations and how it all kind of fits together, the more information we'll have to lead into that final twist of what Mariska has in store for Ken. And I just think that's it's such I can just already tell that it's going to be so fucking wild because of how weird and wonderful Ken's equivalent of magic is.
yeah, like that because that's the thing. I think because Ken hasn't really been in the story like a lot. Like he always comes in and then quickly sort of leaves for a long time again.
Mm.
And what this sort of keeps making me do is write him off as a bit like useless, and like we hear much more about his limitations than his strengths.
Mm.
So you're right, like seeing stuff like the posters, we're about to learn that he's also kind of got them in protagonist mode where like they're more connected to wherever they need to be, but this also means that friends and enemies are also always closer to them,
Mm.
which is just like this hilarious like mechanic. But like just stuff like this just keeps reminding me city magic is not only the coolest shit in this story, but like some of the most powerful.
Yeah.
And I guess as we're going to start to talk about quite explicitly where Mariska might be going with Ken and what the Kenneteers want to do about it, like it's a really good reminder, you're right, that we get a sense of we get this reminder that he can do a lot of crazy, powerful shit. As many limitations as he has, he's fucking strong in other ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, again, I fucking love the idea of like how he's essentially got them in what I'm calling protagonist mode. Like, oh yeah, I'm making it so it's easier for you guys to get wherever you need to be, and that means friends are closer too. But it also does mean enemies are closer, and it's just like what a great again. This is just the other verse taking a trope and making it textual. Like the Kenneteers, thanks to the city, are literally being put in the point where it's like the fact that the witch hunters or Mossa is just always going to be around the corner. That's actually like in universe something that should be happening to them.
Yeah, the world is quite literally starting to revolve around them a bit.
Yeah. And the build up to this is great too. Like they're walking through the park, and it started to jump out to me like, God, there's somebody they know by name. There's somebody they know by name.
Yeah.
And like part of me wrote that off because it is a small town, and like my town's like 4 or 5 times the size of Kennet, and I could still expect to see 5 or 6 people I know by name if I go down to the grocers. So part of me was just like, it's a bit weird how much attention this is getting, but I guess that's just like small town life. And then the sort of lead up that's like, no, this is fucking weird. It's because Ken's doing shit. It was very fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wonderful.
And then, do you have any idea what this moment with Louise was about?
I do.
Because like part of me tries to sit down afterwards and be like, why did Warbo make Louise someone we had a big conversation with? And I've got nothing. Like, why Louise would sort of come back into the story is somewhat important at this stage. I'm like, I don't know, I don't think Warbo would just pick her randomly, but I also can't picture why we would want to be reminded that Louise exists right now.
Possibly it's because... So I'm just kind of off the cuffing this a bit, but there's a few references this chapter to how much the innocents are being left behind by the stuff that's going on. And so my thought is Louise, ever since the start of the story, has kind of been our representation for the innocence of Kennet, right? So I could see that being the reason, just a little bit of reseeding that for that to come in to be part of the grand finale.
Yeah, although I've always more associated her with aware than innocent.
You're right, But those concepts, I think, are close enough that they overlap.
That's true. Maybe he's reminding us she exists because they're about to trade her to the witch hunters.
Oh, interesting.
She'd be a dreadful witch hunter. Witch hunter who can barely walk because she's fucked up her body.
Yeah, I don't think she'd... I would hope that she doesn't turn into a witch hunter.
It's interesting because we saw Melissa briefly recently as well, and it has had me thinking like this town supports a number of aware/aware adjacent, and the Kenneteers actually look out for them. And I wonder if that is something that will resonate with one or two of the witch hunters. The idea that these are practitioners who have made an effort to look out for the aware in their town. So maybe it is something to do with the witch hunters. I don't know. I mean, the only other idea I have is that legitimately she's being set up to be shipped with Ken.
Yeah. I could see it.
I did really enjoy that moment where Avery's like, did anyone else get the impression that Louise locked onto Ken right away? Because he's interesting. And Ken's like, did she? And Verona's just like, maybe that's why our town's birth rate is so low. I really enjoyed that line.
Yes. I do like the idea that maybe they are actually being set up as a couple. That would be pretty funny.
Yeah. The other part of that as well. So then Ken talks about how shit like relationships are in Kennet. And I just wanted to bring this up because this is that part where I'm like, oh, and now we're doing some Avery and Verona overlap. Because obviously, they've got almost exact opposite approaches to what they want out of a relationship. In a lot of ways, but like both of them are very disheartened by the way relationships tend to work in a town like Kennet, and so I guess the idea that Ken sort of sits them down is like, most of these people are basically just drinking it away until they can stomach being where they are in this relationship, and like that sort of hits Avery and Verona in very similar ways. Just again, the way the Kenneteers issues are playing off of each other as well as being explored on their own terms is very, very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, there's this fun moment where Warbo tells us what the next chapter is going to be as well.
Yeah. So Verona says she's going to be meeting with Jeremy before doing the casting with her dad, which is like, yeah, that basically gives us the itinerary for tomorrow's chapter, I assume. But like, the funny thing is, she's like, yeah, I'm going to meet with Jeremy in the morning, and that'll like put me in a better mental state to do the thing with my dad. And like, that just immediately made me think, shit. So if the Jeremy stuff goes sideways tomorrow, like, of all the times for that to explode with Jeremy, this would be one of the best dramatically because
Oh yeah, do you think
Verona
Warbo's
got
gonna
like, yeah,
make it
Verona and
happen?
Jeremy exploding, and then her having to go and do the casting with her dad in a terrible mood because things went badly with Jeremy
Oof.
would be like a disaster of a chapter.
Oh,
So I
now
hope
it's
I'm
gonna
wrong.
happen, Elliot. You've made it happen.
Yeah, I hope I'm wrong. I hope actually Jeremy continues to just kind of be exactly what Verona needs, even if she can't really return the favor to him. Because if there was ever a time for her to be this kind of selfish that she can tend to be, tomorrow morning is probably it. So yeah, I hopefully she's just allowed to continue doing this pattern that I generally don't like, but will
Mm,
support in this circumstance.
yeah, we will. We'll have to see next chapter, I suppose. Um,
It's going to
but
be an awful one, isn't it? It's like because even if the Jeremy stuff is fine, then we got to do the Cass stuff with her dad. And like, if I've learned anything from
yeah.
Brett in this story, it's that he'll find some angle I'm not prepared for that is worse than what I've thought of
Yeah,
to come into the thing.
he manages to miss the bar every single time in a new and terrifying, terrible way.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ken splits up into his Kenponent pieces, and the Kenneteers try to get his help with what is probably coming.
Um. Yeah, and honestly, like, what a cool fucking secret base Ken has. I didn't realize, but the house on Half Street, he fucking shortchanged the shit out of us with that one. This is way cooler.
Yeah, I do
Like,
love seeing these cool hideouts. Like, yeah,
City Magic is the coolest shit.
it
Like,
is very cool.
the more we read this story, the more I'm actually just like I remember sort of, at the end of Pact, we used to have discussions about what sorts of practice we might want to do or everything. This story has pretty much just entirely convinced me that City Magic is what I'd want to do.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, I can
Um,
see it. City
I
Magic
will
is
say,
cool.
one of my other
Mm,
thoughts here was like seeing this Ken base. My thought was, shit, I want Ken to be my familiar.
mm,
And then I was like, is that allowed?
mm.
Are you allowed to take an anima corporeal as your familiar? Like,
Allowed by who, Elliot?
with the spirits, I don't know.
I'm
Like,
sure they're fine with it. What do they
oh, I
care?
wonder if he's capable of saying yes.
I'm sure it
Like,
would have weird implications, but I don't think it would be disallowed.
it just feels like too crazy. Like, if you became the familiar of Ken, you would sort of be able to tap into Ken's senses, like
Mm.
Avery does.
You'd kind of become a de facto lord of Kennet, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and you'd be intimately tied to like the town in crazy ways. Like, you haven't seen Unsleeping City, have you? But
I have not. No.
ah, fuck. I'll have to DM Jay about it. I think he's the only other person. I think Jay's the only other person who has like read Pale and watched the Unsleeping City that I know of. But there's a character who, now that I'm thinking about it, is basically the equivalent of the familiar of a Ken for New York. And it just sort of means that like the bus always arrives exactly when they need it. Like the queue for the post office just disappears when they need to go to the post office. That's what I imagine being familiars with Ken would be a bit like. But you probably get all the downsides too. Like now you're stuck with
Yeah,
Ken.
it seems like it would be pretty powerful in terms of which type of practicing would be the most useful in your day to day. It definitely feels up there.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. But like it would come with drawbacks. Like you would be kind of tied to Kenneth like in this way that like when Kenneth's hurting, that's going to hurt you. I imagine Ken's quite powerful. Like we've talked about how more powerful familiars kind of push their energy into you rather than the other way around. So like
Mm,
maybe a lot of that hopelessness and directionlessness that we're about to get into the Kenponents having would seep into you, and you would be somebody who would stop being the kind to really be a go-getter, I suppose.
yeah.
We'll see when
When what?
Verona?
When
I'm trying to think which
yeah.
Kenneteer would actually take Ken as a familiar. The
Would
answer
it
is
be a familiar or would Ken be a domain? That's a question we'll find out later in the story.
yeah. It'd probably be a combo thing. You could probably swing it as a combo thing.
Yeah. Um.
Anyway,
Anyway.
yeah, I mean, I really like Ken and like all of his children as this kind of just a roast of what small town thinking can be. Like as I've said, my town doesn't really map to Kent all that well, but it is kind of a small town, and there is very much like there was a lot of this that really resonated with my frustrations with living here. Like the death of the small town is something that's been talked about a lot in both fiction and nonfiction. Um,
Mm,
and it's not often that it resonates as closely, I think, with just like what it has been like living in this town that in some ways has just been dying since I was
mm,
a kid.
mm. Yeah.
Like my town's a bit lucky. There's a university here which has basically been like a lifeline that has stopped us from suffering the same way a lot of nearby places have.
Mm,
So my town's kind of unique in that way, but like we're not completely immune. And watching it happen to friends in like nearby towns, it's just like the yelling that the Kenneteers start doing at the Ken entities here was very much stuff I've wanted to yell at my town for years.
yeah. The hopelessness of Kennet really comes through talking to these Kenponents. Like they just are so, in the very literal sense, they have no hope. They are so worn down and defeated.
Yeah, and I just like that really resonated with like what I see. Like I think I was talking about this on our Discord, but like there's been a restaurant location here in town
Mm,
that over the last 8 years, I don't think I've seen a restaurant survive there for more than 6 months.
mm.
A new one just opened last month, little Vietnamese place.
Well, good luck to them.
Yeah, and like that's it. Just it hurts me to see it open because I like walk past it and it's completely empty, and you have that awkward moment where you're sort of walking past and like a waiter working there sort of makes eye contact with you as you're walking past, and you have to like look away because I'm not going in there to eat. Like I've already eaten or whatever, and it's just like
The
it
pleading
drives me.
eye contact.
It just drives me nuts because I'm like I feel so sorry for them, but then at the same time
Mm,
I'm like, you idiots, why did you open in this location? No one survives here. Like you
mm,
need to be doing something different. Just opening another restaurant in this spot clearly is not the fucking solution.
yeah.
And it's so painful and like yeah, just the idea that like Ken is really fulfilling his role as this person the Kenneteers can kind of yell at like you want to your town at large, but he's fulfilling that in both ways because he's entire you can't argue with him in the same way that you can't argue with 5,000 people. Like every time they sort of bring something up, Ken's just like, or the Ken opponents are a bit like, I don't really like to think about politics, stresses me out. And it's like, that really feels like the way, if you try to be an activist in a small town, it made me think of Laurie. Like people will just kind of shut you out and do what Rowan did, where just kind of, they'll placate you if they're close to you, but
Mm.
not
Not
actually really
actually
help or
listen.
go along with
Yeah.
it in a meaningful way. Like, yeah, I think Ken has always been great as this kind of stand-in for the vibe of the whole town, but it's never been more true than in this conversation where the Kenneteers essentially try to argue with four people, and those four people stand in for 5,000 in a way that really feels appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a frustrating interaction, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad Jess stepped in when she did and just told them, fucking stop. Like, this is going
Yeah.
nowhere. Like, because they're trying to reason with Ken like a person, but that's not what he is. He's a group of people, and a group of people don't work like that.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, the trio try to summon an other side to Kennet, which fails, unfortunately.
Yeah, I got really excited as this started because I was like, oh, I didn't think that was how Ken worked. I thought this was against the rules, but I guess they're just that powerful now and the magic matters. This is really cool. This says a lot about. Oh, no, okay, never
Yeah,
mind.
nah, bummer. Yeah, and the reason that we're given for it failing is because the others aren't actually really a part of the town in any tangible way. And I think
Yeah,
that's very interesting because it kind of implies that the others and practitioners, like when we've been thinking about the little walled garden that they want to set up, the reason that they have chosen Kennet is because it's off the radar. There isn't much going on. So there's no interference with that. But that puts them at odds inherently with Kennet in the sense that the Kennet others have a motive to make sure that Kennet never becomes a more successful or prosperous town, right? And I think that's very interesting because that kind of inherently sets up a system where Kennet can't succeed. If the others get what they want, Kennet shouldn't improve or prosper. And that's just kind of problematic, right? And it's something that I'd never really considered, but this brings it to the front and makes you kind of consider the thought that the others don't want Kennet to be a successful town.
Well, yeah, because that brings practitioners and the concept of
Mm,
lordship and
mm,
shit they're actually avoiding. You're right, and I mean, though, I would imagine like even if you went to a big city like Thunder Bay or like I don't know another big Canadian city, Toronto, and you met their version of Ken, so you met I don't know Tunny, the Toronto spirit.
yep.
It'd probably be the same story because I imagine even if there is a bigger magic scene in a bigger city, the whole concept of the Seal of Solomon kind of inherently separates it from the world of the innocents, right?
Mm,
So, like the magical parts of any town or any city presumably can't really manifest in someone like Ken because almost the whole point of the Seal of Solomon is that those two worlds are separate.
mm,
And I almost feel like this is the thing we're starting to push on a bit is like the idea, Avery asked Miss like last chapter, do you hate innocence? And Miss was like, not really directly, but I hate a lot of the shit that's built out of the same, seal.
mm,
And I guess this moment with Ken is almost highlighting why, in a way, innocence is a little bit problematic because as long as there's this strict line for innocence, like Kennet has to be for people first and the others are on the outskirts definitionally, the others will never really get that same power and representation as the innocents get.
mm.
So yeah, like I guess I'm going like a step above you where I'm thinking they're not just disincentivized from helping it grow. I think even if they did, it still wouldn't matter. Like they're not ever going to be woven into the fabric of the city in a way that would something like Ken would manifest.
Mm, yeah,
It's it might even be a bigger problem.
yeah, yeah.
And is that something that Kenneteers could even try to fix? Like, I mean, we've talked about Kennet as a whole getting more aware. Like, it would be a fucking wild ending for this story to be like, and then all of Kennet was aware and the magic was more integrated.
Mm.
Like, that would certainly get the attention of outside regions.
Probably not the good kind of attention you would think.
No, and I think we've talked about that in like extra materials. That's part of what can make places get knotted up. Like if the seal gets eroded, like something like innocence doesn't really exist anymore. The
Mm,
spirits kind of naturally border it up to protect the seal.
mm,
So like eroding innocence isn't really the solution, but at the same time, it is kind of the problem. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess that's what the Kenneteers are meant to be. Maybe rather than the innocence, they should, maybe rather than the others, they should have tried to pull out the practitioner side of Ken.
Mm,
Although that's only three of them, and that's more of Liz's domain than Ken's, I think.
yeah. Yeah. So the Kenneteers also raised the idea of temporarily snuffing out Kennet, and understandably, yeah, this idea doesn't get a lot of support amongst the Kenponents.
Yeah, like I get it.
Mm.
I think the Kenponents were not very receptive to the idea that this is definitely just temporary and they'll come back. But
Yeah, well,
also
they didn't
that
lead
like that is
into
an
it.
understandable reaction to the idea. Like, can I just temporarily kill you? Like,
Yeah, they didn't lead into it in a good way. The way that the idea was started was, what if we uncreated you temporarily? Of course, like come on.
yeah. Oh, and then there's a sort of this is technically up for debate aspect
Yeah.
to it. Yeah, it wasn't handled super great, but
No.
there's probably an argument for there not being a good way to
Yeah.
pitch like a
A
temporary
temporary murder.
euthanasia situation.
I don't know. I mean, like the idea of it being akin to an induced coma, I think, is
Yeah,
probably the better way
better pitch.
to raise it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There was also part of me that thought, like, talking about Ken and the Kenponents and all of their flaws as not really people, but stand-ins for this group of people with a bunch of problems. The idea that Kennet would be naturally resistant to the proposal of like
Mm.
being less important and kind of less cohesive for a section made sense. Like
Mm.
their big insecurity right now is like how the town is dying and they can't really do anything about it. Like everyone's standing there going, I'm working my ass off and this town's still dying and I don't know what to do. And I think the idea of saying, hey, just check out of life for a couple of days, it
Yeah.
makes character sense that the Kens would be like, fuck off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, I did want to call out, like, when we talked about the fact we met two
Two new
sides to Ken for the first
Kenneteers.
time.
What do you call
Um,
them? Kenponents.
yeah, there's Annette O and
And
Mc-
KT Keller
K
McKellar
McKellar
Steel or whatever it is.
Steel,
Yeah.
yeah. Which like I get like so many. It's not really the area I've grown up in, but like I do so many small towns that were like in the 70s and 60s were essentially built on some sort of like physical
Mm.
manufacturing
Manufacturing
thing,
plant or something. Yeah.
and that's usually all gone now. Like that rang very
Yep.
true.
Yep.
I yeah, I think one of the things I really liked about this segment was not just learning that there's kind of these four compass points ideas to Ken's children, but the way each Kenneteer in the conversation almost kind of focused on one, and similarly each Kenponent kind of focused on a Kenneteer.
Mm.
Like Lucy and McKellar were kind of instantly butting heads because he clearly represented the we'll say less progressive uh aspect of the town.
Mm.
Whereas, like, similarly, Avery was like directed almost all of her comments to Annette O, who she basically like implicitly was like, "This reminds me of my parents."
Mm.
So it was like Avery was having this argument with her parents in a way, like just to sort of speak to the coolness of Ken standing in for everyone. Like each Kenponent stood in for a certain demographic in the town, and getting to watch the Kenneteers try to have that argument with the group that resonates with who they want to yell at was very fun.
Yeah. 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 It was great.
Verona was the one I maybe didn't notice so much. I think that's because she usually just has that with Ken, who looks like her
Mm.
dad.
Mm.
But yeah, like watching Lucy sort of direct most of her challenges at McKellar, but then get challenged
Still,
by
yeah.
Nettie. Like, yeah, it was a really
Yeah.
cool sort of dynamic.
Yeah, it was great, wasn't it? But yeah, I mean, the trio leave frustrated from this encounter. And yeah, we end this chapter with a lot of like just kind of uncertainty, I suppose, about what the Kenneteers are gonna do next.
Yeah. I think yeah, they didn't really have a concrete plan for how this interaction would go, but it definitely failed. And now they're sitting here
Mm,
like, shit, what do we do?
yeah.
I wanted to call out this bit that happens sort of immediately after they get kicked out by the Kenponents for offering to kill them for a bit. Because I didn't quite register this on my first read through, but I saw some people pointing it out, and on my second read through, I couldn't believe I didn't see it. When somebody's talking about, oh, do you think we can talk to Ken again and try and convince them? Lucy says, "Fat friggin' chance. They're stubborn, bullheaded, argumentative." And then Verona adds, "They give up too easily and they refuse to face the future." And it's just like, oh, these are definitely kids of Kennet because they're trying to yell at Ken and Kennet, and they're just absolutely calling themselves out there. It's beautiful. Like Lucy yelling at someone for being stubborn, bullheaded, and argumentative is just like absolutely the same three words she used when she picked the goat
Yeah.
as her alt mask, and yeah, like not facing the future. Like Verona knows that's what she's doing.
Yeah.
It reminded me like obviously we've talked about like Carl Jung's like Jungy and stuff a bit in the context of Pact and Pale in the past, but it's
Mm,
for those of you following the game club at the moment, we are doing Control, where Jungian philosophy is a very overtly textual. And it
mm,
made me think of he has this quote where he said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So basically, that idea that like the characteristics in other people you find really really annoying is very likely a little insecurity about your own behavior that you have. And I think the Kenneteers are expressing that perfectly right here.
yeah. 100%. Yeah. So the final the chapter ends with Avery saying, "Why can't you just reach out, communicate, accept help and support?" And then Snowdrop, I think, sneezes or nibbles her or something, and she kind
Yeah,
of realizes this. And so obviously because the chapter calls out this final one, I was like, "Oh yeah, this is wonderful." But then you're right, I didn't notice, but Lucy and Verona also have the exact same thing. I just
Yeah.
thought, oh god, it's so good.
Like, yeah, Avery's one is a little bit more obvious because, like, Snowdrop calls it out. Like,
Yeah.
the moment where Avery's like, "Oh, just accept the help and communicate," and like, Snowdrop's just like, "You fucking serious?" Um, I almost wish Verona and Lucy had someone to do that for them. Yeah, and I mean, I think that sort of brings my love for this whole Ken scene full circle because
Yeah.
we've talked so much about how they've been arguing with a proxy for the town, like literally
Mm.
and figuratively, and then this moment, the chapter basically ends with a reminder that these three are from this town. Like, as much as we want to criticize everyone else in the town, it's them too. Like, it's yeah,
Yeah.
this is like everything. This chapter, the way Ken is used in this chapter, is like everything he could have possibly lived up to be as a concept. I remember when we were first
Yeah.
introduced to like, oh, imagine all the cool shit you could do, and I think
Yeah. Ken is
Wabo did all of it in
consistently,
this chapter.
yeah. Ken is always
Like,
like that, right? Like Ken is always so much living up to the promise of physical manifestation of the town. It's what a
yeah,
wonderful character he is.
but I think this is the peak of it for me. Like, if Ken had failed in every other chapter, which he hasn't, but if Ken had failed in every other chapter and it had just been this one that he was good in, that would still justify him being in the story to me.
Mm,
Like, this is everything you could do with this concept executed perfectly.
yeah.
I loved it.
And with that, that's the end of the chapters for this week.
Oh,
But
so we get to look forward to
to
Verona's Happy
Verona's
Fun Day
dad coming
tomorrow.
back into the story, yeah. Imagine
Been
if
too long since we saw Brett. Maybe he's better now.
what if next
He's been.
chapter is the Lucy chapter and we just get to skip all that stuff?
I mean, actually, you know what? I was gonna say I wouldn't mind, but I think I actually would. I wanna.
You want to hash it out?
I'm ready to be mad at Brett again.
Yeah.
And yeah, he might be fixed. He's probably gone to about 3
Yeah.
sessions of therapy already. So
Yeah.
he could be
That's
good.
enough to fix somebody, right? Anyway, so let's get into some Pale predictions. So these are predictions that the community has left in our Pale predictor form. Do you have a prediction you want to pull out, Elliot?
I do, but just a quick shout out. That prediction sheet is linked below, so please keep adding more.
Yes.
The more predictions we get, the more we're going to pull out in this segment. And I've got one from I'm Easily Impressed, who I believe is one of our regulars, who points out that when we meet the fauna ephemera, we obviously there are 2 wolf puppies, but there are 3 human babies. And I'm Easily Impressed points out we never did find the remains of those 3 teenagers who were killed when they took the Carmine furs.
Ooh.
So I'm Easily Impressed has gone for the like very sort of bold and specific prediction that Marisica took those 3 boys' bodies and glamored them into these babies.
I do really like this. This is very
Yeah,
cool.
this is an idea that came like out of nowhere for me, but I read it and I was like, "Fuck, that would be fun."
I mean, and I
Um,
don't know if we'll ever get the opportunity for this to be confirmed, but it's
yeah,
just a wonderful prediction.
well, because I went to look at what the last word we got on those 3 boys was, and all I could find was that in 11.4,
Mm,
as part of like her interrogation, Edith did say that they were dead.
yeah.
But you could argue that being glamored into babies that have a like glamour wolf mum is a kind of dead.
Well, and like their eyes are like wolf eyes and stuff at this point as
Yeah.
well. So, like, yeah, I mean, they seem like they're not. If this was the case, it seems like they're not going to get back to being themselves.
Oh yeah, but
They're
like
functionally dead.
yeah, but I think like there's definitely the possibility that Marisica used their bodies for parts to help make the
Yes.
3 human glamour babies.
Yes.
And I like that's a link I never would have made. And I fucking love it.
That is a great one.
It's so wild.
Yeah. For my prediction, I've put out a prediction from a new predictor, I believe, ANZN, Anzen. Their prediction is effectively that they think Kennet is going to be forced into the fight for the Carmine throne because, with the furs in its possession, with the blood all over it, Kennet is very much inherently tied to the Carmine throne right now, and so might be able to be pulled in and forced to basically contest the throne, which would mean either John would have to destroy Kennet or sacrifice himself for Kennet or, something like this. I like this prediction because I love, we still don't know exactly why Ken is important, but you can kind of feel that he's going to be very important. So
Oh
this is
yeah.
a pretty great explanation for that.
I guess I really like the idea that Kennet is kind of perhaps being set up. I guess that would tie into some of what we maybe talked about with like the innocence being eroded
Mm.
and all of that. Um, but this makes me wonder. And I wish I had Snowdrop's Tiny Fan around. If you're listening, Snowdrop Tiny Fan, please let me know what you think of this wild off the cuff theory.
Here we go.
So, well, Snowdrop's Tiny Fan has put a lot of work into like informing everyone who the two talkers were in "Can We Talk About the Girls?" That phone
Mm.
call at the
Mm.
end. What if one of them was Ken?
Okay.
I'm just saying, Snowdrop's Tiny Fan, I'm sure will come and tell me why that isn't possible. But
What's the implication of that?
well, that Ken's going to put the furs on and he's in on the conspiracy,
Yeah.
which I'm pretty sure he has said he's not in on the conspiracy
Yeah, I
explicitly a
think
number of
so.
times. But I I don't want to let some facts get
Maybe
in the way of
like
this idea.
Kane McKellar Steele is in on the conspiracy.
Yeah, I think we talked about that once. Like, could it be one of his
Yeah,
children? But
maybe
like,
we did, didn't we?
this story has consistently been pretty clear on like not letting bullshit like that slip through. Like, remember we had the whole,
Rightfully
it,
so.
yeah, like we had it with Edith. I remember it was a big thing. Like people were like, oh, when Edith says I, she could mean Edith or the girl by candlelight, and Wildboy eventually just sort of had to step in and be like, no, I'm not. That's not the trick I'm pulling on you. Like,
Yeah.
so I think learning that that's exactly what was happening with Ken would surprise me.
Yeah.
I feel like Walbo doesn't have to resort to such cheap ploys to play us all like puppets.
Yeah, I think so. I think Wobbo has a higher standard for his twists.
Well, he's a better fairy than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um so yeah, those are some predictions. If you have a prediction, you can leave it in our Pale Predictor form, which you can find linked in the show notes down below. Let's dive into some discussion questions, shall we, Elliot?
Yeah, let's do it. So over the last fortnight, we asked, what enticements would it take for you to take a role as a judge, and which judge would you like to be?
Mm. We got a bunch of answers to this. A lot of
Funnily, I think we got every answer but Carmine for which judge
yeah,
would you like to be,
true.
which I thought was
I
fun.
think people have seen how troublesome the Carmine role is. We've seen a lot of that in story. So yeah.
I mean, it also is just like, I'm glad that we don't really have any listeners who are like, violence and destruction. Fuck yeah, that's what I'm about.
Yeah, I was actually surprised by how many kind of altruistic answers we got, right?
Yeah.
So we had well, let's get into some of them. Beard of Valor basically talked about how their plan would be effectively they would be willing to more or less sacrifice themselves in order to start getting inertia moving in the right direction in the sense of you know they would judge things to start making some kind of positive social progression and yet while they mean that kind of means that they wouldn't probably last that long, they would still be keen to do it.
Yeah, it was kind of what we saw with when Lucy first dove into the Carmine's head, where basically the Carmine was told, "Don't make these expensive decisions."
Yeah.
Beard of Valor basically sort of said, "I'll hop into the role and make some of those, and I won't last long, but hopefully I'll kick off some good change."
Mm.
I do think the Alabaster also told the Carmine that people would come and undo her changes after she was unseated.
Mm.
So that would be my concern for Beard of Valor's plan: is you got to make sure that the next person doesn't just immediately undo the good shit you did.
Yeah.
Thinking of like Australian politics in particular, whenever we get a party puts good policies in, and then the next party immediately comes in to undo all of our progress.
Yeah.
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 I liked Vice Versa's answer because they basically just said, "I want to be the Alabaster," and to be honest, I don't even need many enticements. The Alabaster seems like the good judge job. You get to like help people who need it.
Yeah, surviving the longest seemingly is also a pretty good draw, I think.
Well, from what I understand, I think we've been told in Pale that is relatively unique for this area,
Yes.
and that usually the Alabaster is the one with one of the higher turnovers
Yeah.
because it's not really in their nature to fight a challenge. They're often captured or replaced by someone
Mm.
else.
Yeah.
I wonder what an Alabaster challenge looks like. Like we know the Carmine one is like fucking WWE fight to the death, and I'm very excited for that. And we know the Aurum one is like, a series of mind games and board games and stuff. How do you reckon you get the Alabaster roll?
Maybe it's whoever can cut out the most pounds of flesh and survive kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, maybe, yeah, I don't know. Maybe you have to do an act of mercy. Like, I'm imagining
Mm,
somebody forgiving somebody who'd wronged them. I don't know.
mm, mm.
I mean, it's the
Yep.
same with the Sable. I wonder what the Sable's contest looks like. Like, who can not die the longest?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or who dies first?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the Carmine contest too.
Well, no, it's the opposite. It's whoever dies first. So everyone
Oh,
gets in a pit
sorry, who
together.
dies
And
first? Yeah.
yeah, if you die first, then you get to come
Then
back and
you're
be the
out.
Sable.
Gosh. What a contest.
No, yeah, like I've just the Aurum is the only one I reckon I could have maybe guessed as a challenge theme was like the idea of it being games of chance and like playing off other people.
Yeah.
The Sable and the Alabaster, I'm just looking at them like I don't know how you prove that you're the most merciful or the most final.
Mm,
I guess the Sable isn't just about death; they're about like endings and finality.
mm.
Anyway, sorry, I've sidetracked us. We also got an answer from Animal City who said they don't want to be a judge because it's like a commitment for life and they're not really into that. I can respect that answer, basically.
Yeah.
Not wanting to commit to a job that you have for hundreds of years until you get killed. The fair position to take.
Yeah. Fair enough, I think. Um, Yeah, so we got an answer. We got some answers that were pretty altruistic. Hero of Old Iron's one was again trying to preside over society and help steer it in positive directions, going for the Aurum. Enticements wise, a lot of so this is interesting. A few people picked enticements that I think maybe go against the spirit of the role a bit, like or the spirit of being a judge. Hero's enticement they suggested was trying to outlast the idea of the role. E.g., when they lose the role, they would love to survive a bit, which seems I don't know. It seems like it goes against how it all works.
Yeah, I don't know if that's allowed as an option because I agree. They sort of quoted that part where the mouse was like, "No, I had so much I wanted to see happen."
Yeah,
Before the woman just sort of cracked his neck and ate him.
yeah,
And I agree, like that. Yeah, that broke my heart as well. Like the idea that, yeah, again to go back to Australian politics, just as you start to get some shit moving, you get taken out and you're not allowed back in.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree that like that is the enticement I'd want is the ability to outlive the role. I just don't know that they give you that option, unfortunately.
yeah, yeah,
But Hero, I think, also sort of touched on, I guess, a bit similar to Beard of Valor in that they'd push for things probably a bit more than they're meant to, so they may not have the longest reign, which is
yeah,
probably another big part of why they want to outlast the role.
yeah,
'Cause they just want to get in there, make some important changes, and then get kicked out.
yeah,
I like that.
yeah. I can respect it for sure. Um, so yeah, we also had who else should we pull out? Oh, we also had Lurking Beluga, who suggested a sable just because it seemed like the least morally complex, which I liked. Like less altruistic than some of the other ones, but the thought of how can I survive as long as possible rather than how can I do as much good as long as possible. If you have to be a judge, I can kind of get it. I can kind of get that vibe.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if in most areas the Sable is generally the longest seated judge.
Mm,
Because if like, well, the Carmine would presumably just have a bit of turnover because it's violent. We've
mm,
talked about the Aurum, and we've said in most places the Alabaster usually gets turned over. So the concept of death doesn't change too much. I can see why a Sable would stick around for a long time.
yeah.
Um, I wonder about it being the least morally complex, though, actually. And I think Lurking Beluga did bring this up at the start of their answer. They were like, to be fair, we don't know too much about all of them.
Mm,
And I think that is fair. The more I try to picture exactly all the scenarios that the Sable and the Alabaster would get, I'm a little bit confused.
mm,
Um, but like the one time we've seen the Sable do something was that interview with Edith, and I did not think the Sable acted perfectly in that. Like,
yeah.
I don't know that it is always as easy as you might think to be the one to do with deaths and endings, because a lot of it could be you deciding when something ends.
Yeah, definitely.
One last answer I did want to pull out as well was from Tizawat.
Yes.
This was another sort of very altruistic one, and they're another Alabaster team Alabaster group.
Yeah, I can
Just
fully relate to the idea of the Alabaster's ability to protect people, and that role is one that I see as like I could totally find myself being quite happy in that role, I think.
yeah. Although I do, whenever I think that, I then immediately go to what Lurking Beluga's logic was, which is in general that role doesn't last very long.
Mm,
So yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
Tizawat also pitched that they'd be willing to be the Sable if they basically got a bunch of perks that Death gets in Discworld. It was a good funny. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Yeah, good stuff.
But yeah, so we got a new
Yes.
discussion question for this next fortnight.
Yes. So here's the new discussion question. As we head into the finale, which Kenneteer feels like they're doing the worst at dealing with their issues, and who feels like they're doing the best? I think it's very interesting that, the Kenneteers definitely have stuff that they're kind of struggling with at the moment. I think the conflicts and tensions mounting between the Kenneteers is going to lead to a very interesting finale. Very interesting twists on the finale as they have to deal with these issues while they're also dealing with, the Carmine contest and all this stuff. So I do think we got some interesting stuff coming up for sure.
Well, yeah, and so many of their character arcs to me feel like they are really coming to a head.
Mm,
Um, like not that they've been, just sitting on their ass for the story. We've been talking about most of them since arc 1 and 2.
yeah,
But it really starts to feel like the Kenneteers in the last arc have really taken to that step of consciously asking themselves the questions we've been asking of them since arc 1.
yeah,
Like Lucy has really been sitting here recently going and asking other characters in the story, like, do I want to be the knife or the smoke? Avery is literally saying, okay, I can be more pushy, but it's very easy to overdo it. How do I balance this? And
yeah,
like, don't get me started on Verona. So yeah, it's kind of like as these are all coming to a head and the story's coming to a head, I'm curious to see which Kenneteer people think is sort of the least prepared and who is the most.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So you can leave your answers to that in our discussion thread, which you'll find linked in the show notes down below. Also, while you're in there, leave us your thoughts on these chapters or on this episode.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a discussion question answer. I'm
Yeah.
trying to get better at checking Reddit. Like last week, or the week before, we got a bunch of really good comments. I think one was from Vice Versa on Reddit who pointed out like I'd been a bit confused about a read on one thing, and Vice Versa like told me their interpretation that made a lot of sense. So I'm trying to get better at actually responding to those on Reddit, but we do read them and they're appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I always enjoy them. So always
Uh,
pop them in there.
Don't forget to review us on your podcast platform that you listen on. Those reviews make our podcast get more attention by the algorithm, which
Yep.
really just means Pale gets more attention by the algorithm.
Yeah.
And, if you convert someone to reading Pale via our podcast, then that's a win for everyone.
Yeah. It's an all
And we're on
round good
Amazon Music
time.
as of yesterday. So if you been stuck in another platform because you're waiting for us to switch to Amazon Music, well, you're in luck.
Yeah. Amazon Music, the best podcast.
Oh, they
Podcast
emailed
platform.
us like 2 days ago and were like, "Add your podcast," so I did.
Fair enough.
I
Fair
didn't know
enough.
they did. I did like. Feels like everybody, like Spotify. It's like everyone who does music stuff is getting in on podcasts now.
Yeah. Anywho, if you want to check out some of the other great shows on the Duff Media Network, why not head to the website at duffmedia.com? There's all kinds of wonderful shows on there, and you might find your next show to fall in love with.
Yes, I do want to give another special shout out to Pale in Comparison, which has quickly become my favorite podcast to listen to each week.
Yeah.
Those of you on our Discord will know I have had far too much fun with their discussion question this week. And I have actually had to swear off providing any more answers. So yeah, if you're not reading Pact, get cracking and dive into Pale in Comparison. If you have read Pact, go listen to Pale in Comparison.
Yeah. If you want to support any of the wonderful shows on the Diff Media Network, you can do that. You can do that by going to the Patreon at patreon.com/duffmedia. That's where you can support all the great shows on the network and have a great time doing it, I suppose.
Yeah, we did our Doof and Chill earlier today. That was very fun. We played some Jackbox and Gartic Phone with a bunch of people.
Yep.
We also God, I don't know if I meant to say this yet. There will be some extra bonus content for the $5 tier coming soon, unless
Whoa.
unless those plans change because I've announced them too early. In which case, forget you heard anything.
Oops.
But there may perhaps be more coming to that bottom $5 tier. So check it out if you want more bonus sort of doof content that is an add-on to our regular shows.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, cool.
Hold on.
And of course,
Don't forget Wildbow's Patreon,
I- yeah,
patreon.com/Wildbow.
exactly right. Exactly right, Elliot.
We wouldn't be here without him.
Yeah,
But it's that simple.
it really, really, truly is that simple. So make sure you don't forget about Wildbow's Patreon, and we'll see you next time, I suppose.
See ya.